Winston Churchill. Steadfast, brave, and famously stubborn. These are the qualities of Britain's greatest Briton, a man who stood up to the Nazis and rallied the British people to fight on despite facing certain defeat. If you asked the British public in 1944 about their thoughts on Churchill, many would lean back, misty-eyed, and speak nostalgically about how he steered Britain through danger to calmer waters. But if you then asked the same question in 1945, you might have got a different answer, because they voted him out of government once the war was over. Anyways, they voted him back as Prime Minister in 1951, so no hard feelings. Although he is beloved by many, some accuse Churchill of racism, Islamophobia, and war crimes. For example, it's argued that his wartime policies made food unaffordable for the poor in India, which resulted in the Bengal famine. But before we judge him, let's take a look at his life. Born Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill in 1874 in Oxfordshire, England, Churchill's future prowess as a political figure was arguably passed down to him through his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, who was a politician that belonged to the British aristocracy. Due to his father's lineage as the youngest son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough, there was little chance that Churchill or his father would ever likely succeed to the family title. The young Churchill spent most of his time with his brother Jack in numerous boarding schools away from the aristocratic lifestyle of his cousins and relatives. Like most boys of his age, the young Churchill was playful and rebellious. He never really paid much attention to his academic pursuits. As a result, his academic track record at Harrow, the final boarding school in London that he graduated from, was far from being distinguished. Well, being average isn't a bad thing. There was one particular subject that all of his teachers knew he could not hide his interest and potential in, and that subject was history. If only a bunch of potatoes could teach him a thing or two. His keen inquisitiveness about the world and the great empires that helped shape it was a precursor to his very own contributions in his later years to the history books that fascinated him so in his youth. Due to his rather unexceptional academic record, Churchill's father encouraged him to sign up for a military career. It took him 3 attempts to pass the entrance examination into the Royal Military College. Upon his acceptance into the college, Churchill did his very best to prove himself as a better man than he was a child. He graduated from his military education with flying colors and placed 20th out of his class of 130 students. His father, Randolph Churchill, had a troubled relationship with his son throughout his lifetime. While the younger Churchill was gaining distinctions in his military college, Randolph's ill health was beginning to deteriorate even more, and he eventually died of his illness in January 1895. The impact of his father's death was tremendous, as Winston Churchill now found himself the head of his family right as he was starting his military career. His regiment, the 4th Hussars, were deployed in many different places, from Cuba to India and finally to South Africa. It was during his military tenure that the young Lieutenant Churchill would start to realize his literary ambitions. Taking on the dual role of a soldier and correspondent, he soon realized that his fledgling career as a writer was unraveling right before his eyes, a job that he undoubtedly had to give up in exchange for full-time politics. However, he regularly wrote and authored several works intermittently throughout his entire life. Churchill formally resigned his commission in the British Army in pursuit of a living by the pen. He wrote for numerous publications, and his works were beginning to gain popularity throughout the literary circles of London. In December of 1899, Churchill found himself right in the middle of the intensifying Boer War in South Africa, working as a correspondent for London's Morning Post. He was eventually captured by the Boer Army for his part in rescuing an armored train that was being taken over by the Boers. He was held prisoner in the States Model School in Pretoria, South Africa. His captors put a ransom of £25 for his release, but the young Churchill climbed over the walls of the school and slipped away in a brave escape attempt. After his escape, Churchill didn't want to go back home to London. Instead, he quickly took up arms and with all the military experience still fresh in his mind, joined a crew of irregular cavalrymen called the South African Light Horse to fight against his former captors, the Boer Army. He continued his correspondence work on top of the short skirmishes he went on against the enemy, and the readers back home in London were absolutely thrilled at his day-by-day accounts of the difficult yet impending victory during the final days of the Boer War. Winston Churchill finally returned home to Britain as a military hero, despite not having an official commission role in the British Army. Nonetheless, his actions during his time in South Africa saw his fame skyrocket almost overnight, due in no small part to his writing and the works he had published up to then. He wasted no time in turning this opportunity into wealth, amassing almost £10,000 through publishing his work and conducting tours and lectures across the country. He then used that money to finance his journey into politics, where he first started out as a Conservative Party representative at Oldham, much like his father before him. His parliamentary debut was in the House of Commons, whereby a speech impediment and psychological inhibition to conduct impromptu discourse unfortunately prevented him from debating the ideas raised in the hall as much as he would have liked. Although Churchill initially held traditionally conservative political leanings as an homage to his deceased father, he once famously defected to the Liberal Party in 1904 after numerous disagreements with his Tory colleagues about tariff issues. He then spent the next 10 years fortifying his political awareness and rising through the ranks of the Liberal Party, subsequently capturing his first ministerial position in politics as Under Secretary of State for the British colonies. By the time World War I started in 1914, Winston Churchill had taken up the position of First Lord of the Admiralty and assumed civil and political control over the British Navy. This position marked some of the lowest points in his career, the most significant being the disastrous Gallipoli campaign that he fought so hard to implement in Parliament. Churchill became the face behind this disastrous defeat for the British public, even though the Gallipoli campaign, in theory, could have ended the war and in turn saved hundreds of thousands of people. After Gallipoli, he decided to give up his political position to take up arms yet again, making his way to France to join the 6th Royal Scots Fusiliers as a lieutenant colonel as the war grew ever closer to the Western Front. Some believe this was his quest for redemption, to restore his personal honor after his misjudgment caused hundreds of thousands of lives to be lost during the Gallipoli tragedy. After World War I was over, he went back into politics, famously crossing the floor again back to the Conservative Party. He served as the Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1924. When the Conservative Party lost power during the 1929 elections, Winston Churchill found himself without a seat in Parliament. He thus went back to making a living via his pen, writing speeches, authoring works, and conducting literary tours. All this was to change, however, as dark clouds from Hitler's war machines in Nazi Germany started to cast an impending shadow over Europe during the early rumblings of what was to become the Second World War. By the time World War II came around, Churchill was already 66 years old. In a time where the average life expectancy was 59, it seemed as though Winston Churchill had been waiting and preparing all his life for this opportunity to stamp his mark in history. He earned the nickname the British Bulldog for his intense patriotism and belief in the greatness of the British Empire, the empire he was born to protect. His love for history and the multifaceted nature of war and conquest, coupled with his extensive political knowledge, turned him into a formidable opponent for Hitler, never bending to the Luftwaffe's innumerable attempts to bomb the British into submission. The leadership of Churchill during these times is incredible. He formed a broad coalition that united all spectrums of the political classes in Britain, except those on the far left and right. Through his united front, Churchill would beat the drum that the whole of the empire would follow. He united them in the survival of Britain and the values he felt the empire stood for. It's during these troublesome times that Churchill made some of his most ruthless decisions, like the attack on the French fleet at Mers el-Kabir, which killed 1,300 French sailors, despite them welcoming their former allies just moments before. But, yet again, it was a decision that guaranteed that the Nazis didn't use the French ships against Britain. That was only the start of a brutal war that would kill millions of people. As the years progressed and fighting intensified, Churchill made many more controversial and ruthless decisions. Churchill openly targeted German cities, which infuriated Hitler, provoking him in turn to bomb British cities in what was to become known as the Blitz. This move, however, saved the RAF from complete destruction, allowing them to defeat the Luftwaffe in the battle for Britain. Churchill was instrumental in forming the Grand Alliance that defeated Hitler once and for all. It was his careful diplomacy that acted as a mediator between the future Cold War rivals of America and the Soviet Union. Whether you love or hate him, it's undeniable that he rallied Britain to hold out against the onslaught of the Nazi war machine. With every speech, every hard military decision, he bought Britain enough time to keep making and buy guns, bullets, and planes. He took Britain from a knife's edge and together with America and their allies took back Europe from the Nazis' grip, beach by beach, town by town. His zeal and infectious passion for traditional British values and his iron will cemented his place as a hero during the years of World War II. He wrote several famous speeches during this time, such as the world-famous "We Will Fight on the Beaches" speech, rallying the call to arms for any able-bodied British man or woman to join in the war effort against the Nazi war machine. This period of his political career ensured that he commanded the love and respect of the British public for the rest of his life. The Conservative Party, which was the party that Winston Churchill led during the years of World War II, was promptly booted out of Parliament right after Nazi Germany surrendered in 1945. Churchill focused the rest of his years out of office on the only thing he knew he could fall back on: his pen and parchment. Apart from a brief reappearance in politics as Prime Minister in 1951, he spent the rest of his time writing, lecturing, touring, and visiting his American friends from across the pond. He died in 1965 and was presented with a state funeral, with tributes pouring in from every corner of the world, a testament to the man whose speeches and unbreakable will continues to inspire millions today. So, what do you think? Was he a great man or just another ruthless leader from the 20th century? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video. Thanks.